What is the worst comic book movie? That has been an age-long question for many years, only boiling up in recent years. I think there's a lot of considerations when answering this question. Some movies are so bad that they're good because of their absurdity. Others are so painfully average that they are hailed as the worst comic book movie. And others, well, they don't even try to be movies. But personally, I feel one requirement for a comic book movie to be the worst is if they betray the source material they are based on. And that would be Fan Force It's Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Hey!
Yeah, the title gave it away. Although I will admit Fan Stick is also one of the worst comic book movies, but it does betray the source material in other ways. Whereas, in my opinion, Amazing Spider-Man 2 betrays so many elements of a comic book movie, as well as questionable decisions from its main character. And I know what you're probably thinking. What, another rant on Amazing Spider-Man 2? We already have plenty of those for 10 years. And while that's true, those reviews came out at a time where angry movie rants were popular. These days, video essays are the big thing. So today, 10 years later, and the fact that the movie is back in theaters for a week, I want to give a post-mortem on why this movie doesn't work, and why, in my opinion, I think it is one of the worst comic book movies ever made. Now, in this day and age, people have come around to the amazing films, mainly because of either fans growing up and projecting their voices online, or how No Way Home acknowledges Amazing 2 by having Peter save MJ in the third act, and him reconciling with Electro. And because of that, many consider the John Watts MCU movies, especially Far From Home, to be the worst Spider-Man movie for not acting like one, and instead a corporate soulless movie to please as many people as possible. Now, I don't normally have the best Spider-Man opinions in the world. I do not care for the Spider-Verse series. What? I don't! It's not for me, and I can respect that. But coming from a normie perspective, I don't mind the John Watts films. They're fun and enjoyable, and Tom Holland does make the best of making Peter Parker work in the MCU. Now, I know that many people like to call him Iron Man Jr. because of his technology, but starting in Far From Home, he learns to break out of Stark's shadow, and as we see at the end of No Way Home, he becomes his own superhero. And I know some people hate the fact that there is MCU-related content in these movies, but that's just an after effect that you have to get used to. Though the fact that Far From Home is the last film of Phase 3, and therefore the last film of the Infinity Saga, that's a bit questionable. But because of the mixed reception of these films, there has been a resurgence of appreciation for the amazing films. You know what, I'm just going to call them the Webb movies, named after director Mark Webb. Hey, if Raimi got his name on his trilogy, why not Mark? So, yeah, people do in fact love Amazing Spider-Man 2. And God bless these people because I don't see it. And I think it comes down to several points that do irreversible damage to this film. First is with the plot. This may not be a hot take, but I don't think it was necessary to incorporate so many plot points and storylines into one movie, which is a flaw that yet another Spider-Man film suffers from, right down to how many villains are in this movie, the exact same amount as Spider-Man 3. The movie is a tonal whiplash of moods, tone, and humor throughout its runtime. Now, Spider-Man 3's tone was also all over the place, but for the most part, all the silly moments in that movie were played comedically. Something I can't say for Amazing 2, where all of the scenes, including the comedic ones, are played 100% straight. You can't have scenes where Spidey is swinging around the streets of New York, next to Peter doing family background digging, next to him arguing with Aunt May about putting his suit in the washing machine. Audiences will be confused on how and what they should feel with each scene. And that's how it is for the whole movie. Seriously, tell me what the central plot of the movie is without making it complicated. You just can't. Even the tagline has no idea what this movie is supposed to be about. His greatest battle begins. That's so generic. At least the original tagline, once you choose your path, there is no turning back, somewhat connects to the movie. Otherwise, What is his greatest battle? Fighting a parasocial stalker? Discussing the morality of a terminally ill friend that we, the audiences, are introduced to? Finding out his parents were spies? The death of his girlfriend? Is it all of these things? Is it none of these things? The movie can't decide. Another major flaw I have with this film is with its villains, mainly Electro. When I first saw his design 10 years ago, I asked myself,
why are you blue?
But considering that the web movies are based off of the Ultimate series, where Electro has a similar design there, I'll give it a pass. What I won't give a pass is his motivation for killing Spider-Man. Him believing that Spidey stole all of his attention on New York 1 is an absolutely silly motivation. I understand that Max Dillon is a socially awkward guy who gets used on by Oscorp, having his ideas go uncredited, and his only glimmer of hope being Spider-Man talking to him on the streets. But having a burning hatred for him because the cameras turned to him is very illogical and was probably a misunderstanding. Even during the scene, Spidey is being friendly as possible and trying to explain himself. Yeah, I know it was actually the NYPD's fault for giving the order while Electro was trying to adjust to his powers, but you're telling me that Peter couldn't swing over to Electro and ask him if he was okay? But then we wouldn't have the big action set piece Sony paid so much money for. Also, you gotta love how you could see the Disney store in Times Square throughout this scene. Gee, I wonder who owns these characters. And the cherry on top of this scene is how it ends. You don't get to see Electro taken away to Ravenloft. Instead, it sort of happens. And no, 2 NYPD officers surrounding him does not make it justified. Also, Spidey wearing a firefighter hat is again tonal whiplash. In the second half of the movie, Electro is just there. Most of the focus is on Harry anyway, so Electro kind of becomes yet another goon that Spidey has to face in the end. Which leads to little to no acknowledgement of one of the biggest sins of the movie. Spider-Man kills Electro! Now, I'm one of those weirdos on the internet that is against Spider-Man killing Electro, but I will die on the hill that it was justified for Superman to kill Zod in Man of Steel. And I could talk about why, but I might save that discussion for another time when it's more fitting. But going back to Amazing 2, the whole death scene just feels out of place. Like there is so much going on in this one fight scene alone. From all of the lights going out in Manhattan, to 2 planes being close to colliding, to the fact that the major monkey wrench in this movie is going to make his grand appearance, Electro doesn't get any fanfare when he goes out, because you have all of these other scenes resolving immediately after he dies. Even the movie makes a close-up of his inhibitor chip overflowing, almost done in a comical way before he goes out. But the biggest flaw I have with this is that Spidey doesn't realize that he just murdered someone. Somebody that was mentally unwell, unchecked, and was confused on this life-changing experience. Somebody that once looked up to Spider-Man as an idol. And here's Peter Parker with blood on his hands of this superfan, and there's no scene where he feels regret over it. Sure, he's sad that someone died, but it's not for Electro, because almost immediately after, the movie is thrusted into the Green Goblin Last Stand storyline, giving Peter no time to reflect on his actions. But I think the reason why he doesn't goes a bit deeper, and it's that this alliteration of Peter Parker doesn't fully understand the concept of mortality. This isn't the fault of Amazing 2, but more so for the first film. The reason why Peter creates the Spider-Man persona is to avenge the death of Uncle Ben from the hands of the guy with the tattoo on his wrist. But much like a lot of the plot lines in the first film, it's dissolved without any resolution. Supposedly, Spider-Man has been throwing the NYPD off from the gang's hideout from the carjacking incidents, Captain Stacy calls him out on it, and that's all we get. And because of that, Peter never gets the realization of if he killed this guy, he would be no different than any other crook in the city. One of the most iconic lines in Spider-Man history, with great power comes great responsibility, is never really told to this Peter. And I checked the Ultimate Comics to see if Uncle Ben's death was the same, and it pretty much is almost identical to how it was in the original story. Raimi takes it another step where Peter inadvertently leads the guy to fall to his death until it's retconned in Spider-Man 3 that he didn't kill Uncle Ben, but whatever. The point is, Peter has immense guilt that he helped kill someone in the Raimi films, whereas in the Webb films, Peter never has that moment on what he's doing is wrong directly, only hearing it verbally. So starting with Amazing 2, Peter's been doing this shtick for months, and he still never got that talk. Just by the opening scene alone, he's making quips to Alexi, he's on the phone with Gwen, he's goofing around while putting hundreds of New York City residents in jeopardy. So when Spidey kills Electro, why would he act any different to how he was at the start of the film? It's only after Gwen dies, Peter gets this self-reflection. Boy, you should have thought about that sooner when you saw her dad's ghost appear in front of you multiple times. But you don't listen. You never listen. And I get that's the main theme of the movie, Peter taking both of his lives for granted, only to experience the greater consequences. But the execution and questionable decisions feel artificial and were forced by the will of the movie itself to set up conflict and misery for Peter. And to tie up this Electro breakdown, there's probably avid fans of this movie yelling at me that, oh, Electro is made of electricity, and energy cannot be created or destroyed, so therefore Spider-Man did not kill Electro. First of all, that's stupid in the same movie where a guy can stick on the walls and another guy transmutating into a heroin addict, so scientific logic is already thrown out the window. And second of all, there's a movie called No Way Home, and it pretty much confirms that Spider-Man did kill Electro. It's a canon event. I hope I did that part right. I'm sorry, Spider-Verse fans. But now, I have been delaying the inevitable, because there's one major issue that plagues this movie, and that issue could be resolved by removing one element. Why is the Green Goblin here? First off, it's not even Norman Osborn, it's Harry, which shouldn't that make him New Goblin because that's his alter ego? But anyway, this is a character that, in my opinion, holds the movie down from its true potential and makes it one of the worst comic book movies. And this has nothing against the actor Dane DeHaan. The only other thing I saw him in was in Chronicle, and he was great in that, so I know the guy can act. The problem is that the writing and story tries to shoehorn in so many things for Harry to do that it overshadows other pre-established elements in the same movie, such as Rhino. You know, Rhino, the third villain that was heavily promoted throughout the marketing and merchandise. How much screen time does Alexi have in the Rhino mech? Oh, not even 2 minutes of screen time? And he only shows up at the very end? Oh no. As I mentioned before, we the audience are introduced to Harry in this movie, despite never bringing this guy up at all in the last film, and supposedly him and Peter are best friends, yet they never act like it. Now I could forgive the fact that Spider-Man had to turn down the offer from Harry of a blood transfusion, because even Peter doesn't know what his blood could do to other people. But what I won't forgive is that the movie has a mighty need of getting Harry on the Goblin Glider just to reenact one of the most iconic storylines in comic book history. And that's right, we're talking about this movie's take on the night Gwen Stacy died. It's almost ironic that both this and Batman v Superman rush an entire movie carelessly adding in characters and plot points in an already crammed movie just to get to reenact a pivotal death in comic history without understanding the context and build-up to those original deaths. Granted, Gwen did have a few romantic moments with Peter in the first film, whereas Superman barely knows the people he's with when fighting Doomsday. The most frustrating part is that the death scene is actually handled well. It's everything leading up to it is a garbled mess with no clear vision. Though I can't say I love everything about the scene, the web forming a hand is a bit too much, and when Gwen's body bounces off the floor, I can't unhear the spring pad sound effect from Sonic. I know, I'm a terrible person. But all of this just makes me ask one question. Did Gwen Stacy really need to die in this film? Follow-up question, did we need Green Goblin in this movie? Not only introducing a key character in the Spider-Man series, but having him kill Gwen in the same film seems like it should be for two separate movies, unless it was in Emma Stone's contract saying that she could only be in two movies, but that wouldn't make any sense because this movie was already planning on making a third installment and she would probably be coming back for the third film regardless. Which is why it would have made sense to introduce Harry here and have him become New Goblin in the next film where he kills off Gwen. Yeah, it sounds exactly like what Harry does in the Raimi films, but hey, it worked there. Kind of. And there was more added conflict because Norman was there in spirit pressuring Harry to take that dark path. So having Harry in the Amazing films be tormented for two movies would work better than just the one. And it's not like this movie could have just set up characters for the third film, because they did with Black Cat in the same movie. Just do the same thing with Harry, put more focus on Electro in the second half, and Rhino in general, and bam, movie fixed. Pushing back Goblin, and therefore Gwen's death, to a third film could let this movie breathe and develop on pre-established plot lines, such as Peter's investigations on his parents, and his relationship with Gwen. Hell, this way you can engage in a love triangle by introducing Mary Jane to the Webb films, almost transitioning Peter's love interest from Gwen to Mary Jane. I know that Sony was planning on this because they originally casted and shot multiple scenes of MJ for this movie. Ultimately, those scenes got cut because guess what? There's a million other things going on in this one movie. If only Sony took more of those considerations, maybe we would have gotten a competent movie, instead of trying to be the next Marvel. Which leads into my final point as to why this movie doesn't work. It's no secret in recent years that Sony has been trying to make a cinematic universe based on the Spider-Man IP, without using Spider-Man. Seriously, how do you fuck that up? It's like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without the bread. And so far, the results of this project have been an astonishing failure that somehow keeps making a profit for Sony to continue the production of these movies. And I believe that starting with Amazing Spider-Man 2, Sony has been trying to force a cinematic universe based on Spider-Man's allies and his rogue gallery of villains, but almost doing it in an artificial way. The MCU wasn't built in a day, but Sony took the wrong ideas and ran for the hills. With Amazing 2, they forced the Green Goblin so much that Rhino barely gets any screen time, they hinted at Black Cat, there's the opening plane sequence with Peter's parents in a James Bond-esque fight scene, the mysterious Oscorp intel agent assembling the Sinister Six, and Gwen's death. Sony was trying to set up so many things in one movie that it becomes an uneven mess. I get that Sony wanted each plot thread to be its own movie, but I don't think having a Sinister Six movie right away would work, and definitely not in the style of Suicide Squad. Plus, some of the choices for the Sinister Six are kind of boring. Oh boy, I can't wait for Spider-Man to duke it out with Scorpion. The worst part is that Sony is so incompetent to do anything with these ideas that they barely commit to the ones that they already have. Even nowadays, with Madam Web taking place in a completely separate universe than either Venom, Morbius, and possibly Kraven too. And if Sony had so much faith in this cinematic universe project, why is the mid-credits scene for this movie the teaser trailer for an X-Men movie made by a different studio? I know it's because there was a lot of infighting between Fox and Webb because he broke his contract there to work on this movie, but don't you think Sony should have put their foot down and convinced him to either shoot another scene on something bigger, or move the Gentleman and Harry scene to the mid-credits to generate hype? Which would actually make more sense because the end credits show the technology and the equipment for the upcoming Sinister Six? But nope, instead we get Mystique causing a ruckus in a government building. That's all we get. And of course, I would be a fool not to bring up the big Sony leak of 2014, where a bunch of Spider-Man adjacent films got exposed, including an Aunt May spy thriller, which thankfully was only just a rumor. And with these supposed leaks for Amazing 3, where Peter resurrects the dead, I doubt anyone would take the web films seriously if any of these films were produced. Honestly, let's be glad that Disney instantaneously absorbed Spider-Man into the MCU before Sony could make yet another cinematic disaster. Doesn't mean they didn't keep trying, though. So that was my late hot take on Amazing Spider-Man 2. Yeah, there were some things I didn't get to discuss, such as the subway laboratory Peter finds and a calculator, or how the radioactive spider was genetically linked to Peter, which is actually an Ultimate Comics idea, or even the deleted scene where Peter talks to his father, which, hey, look at that, gives us a great power, great responsibility moment. Not that it would have mattered anyway because Electro was dead, but better late than never, I guess? But those complaints are more so based on either the source material or smaller complaints that don't permanently damage the film, which is something that I can't say for everything else I brought up. While I consider this film to be the worst Spider-Man film, and therefore one of the worst comic book movies ever made, I do realize that people think the total opposite. Again, I'm just a normie who casually watches these movies, so don't take my opinion to heart. But to prove that I'm not a super piece of shit, I'm pretty sure that many of you who found this video, and therefore my channel, are fans of Spider-Man. Which in this case, hi, I hope you enjoyed this video. I make other video essays, as well as my shared universe content known as Shareverse. But when I was working on this script, I decided to contact a good friend of mine who is a fan of this movie. I had him be my script doctor just to make sure that I didn't take anything out of context or misremember things. And his love and dedication for this movie was in effect the whole time he helped me. And even though we disagree on many aspects of this movie, as well as a few other things, we still talk to this day and learn to respect one another's opinions. So with that in mind, if you do want to counterpick all of my complaints, feel free to do so in the comments. Just be civil about it. And if you liked my video, please like and subscribe. But until then, I'm AJ, and what do I know? I'm the guy who thinks that Terminator Genisys is the third best film in the franchise. Okay, bye!